Gary and I are here talking again, and we thought it would be really interesting for you to hear about Gary's new project, which deals with democracy. Gary, can you first of all tell us what your idea is?
Yeah, and it's in some ways it's not a new idea. It's just that I think I have a new strategy for how to get it implemented.
Mhm.
And it's my observation we are not doing enough in the world to promote democracy. And we see wars starting around us and things seem to be taking bad turns. And yet we kind of know what can get us moved in a better direction. And that's something called democratic peace theory. It's just the basic idea that the more we have democracy, the less nations will be at war with each other. It's not perfect, but it's an approach that's actually proven. I mean, if you look at, like, let's take England and France. Well, they fought, wars over centuries. And today that's unimaginable. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but you can't imagine France and Britain suddenly casually going to war with each other. And you have
Mhm.
to ask, well, what changed? Well, one of the biggest changes is that they're now democracies. Unlike back when they had those wars, they were just kings constantly using almost like a big chessboard.
Mhm.
And it's more complicated than that. It's also economic entanglement. You don't tend to want to blow up people where you get your produce and stuff. So,
Mhm.
but still, you have to take what you can get. And democratic peace theory is kind of almost the only strategy toward world peace. You might think there's more, but if you look into it, there's really not. So the question is, how do we get there?
Mhm.
And a long time ago, I put forth that idea that we need not a United Nations, but we need a United Democratic Nations.
Mhm.
And so I created a website for that. And it's just mostly been sitting there all these years. Not surprisingly, for one person to change the world, not so easy, but I get that. I always knew that. But recently I started thinking, I don't have to just sit and wait for the world to come to me. I can do it, start it. I know that sounds silly, but if I simply take a take the website and put a table with 192, whatever it is, the number there are countries, and then I can simply let people volunteer as a start. Like, for instance, you might volunteer to be like the U.S. representative. Now, obviously, you're not an elected individual, so that really wouldn't count for much. But it's just starting the process, the mechanism. So now, if we can, and then each year we all vote and say, is Jamaica democratic or not? Is Hungary? And then we just tally that and we put that on the page. So what it essentially is a certification. It
Mhm.
certifies that that country is sufficiently democratic. Obviously, that's a fuzzy line, and you have to figure out where to draw it. And I could spend an infinite amount of time trying to set that line, but this project, I've kind of decided I don't need to do that. I just need to let the world figure that out. And all I'm almost doing is recording it. So now, but back to the way you start the process. You're just one person. Nobody voted for you. But it might be, I'm in Fort Bragg. Maybe the mayor of Fort Bragg says, that's a good idea. I'd like to participate. So the fact that the mayor of Fort Bragg may have gotten, 10,000 votes, that's still 10,000 more than Jeff. So that means at the transition point, maybe every 3 months, you swap in a new person. And it's all, with good intent and everything. So it's not like a bad thing. When you get into it, you know up front that you're going to step aside as soon as there's somebody who has more democratic representation. So then maybe at some point in a few years, I'll have the mayor here and a city councilman here. And as it hopefully gets more attention, a country will say, "Well, wait, we want to have. I want our government needs to have more control over that. So rather than let the mayor of Fort Bragg, we'll have Congress do it or
Mhm.
whoever. But we just keep moving up. The theory is that interest increases. There will also be an increase in swapping in somebody who increasingly has more representation for that country.
The idea, tell me if this is right, you're gonna have one person to start with from each country or each democratic country?
One person for each country.
Okay.
and it would always be that way.
Okay. And then that group of people would vote on whether or not every other country is democratic, like,
Yeah,
right,
so once a year, we'll say
once a year.
at
Okay.
at the beginning of the year, we'll have a big Zoom call with 192 participants,
Mhm,
and the goal of that is simply to do the vote. Now,
mhm,
obviously, people outside of that can have as many meetings as they want and can, and I think even a website should have some fundamentals of democracy, like a free press, the rule of law. So we can certainly establish guidelines,
mhm.
but I don't want the United Democratic Nations itself to get all tangled too much into setting real strict rules on that. I think you need to leave that to countries to ultimately make the vote as they decide.
So
So,
would you be a representative to start?
I would never be a representative. My
Okay.
role is first to establish it, and I do have the website, but I need to revise it with this new idea in mind. So I'm more of the technical background. So I
Mhm,
would do that. And probably for the first year, I'm thinking I would also keep track of who the volunteers, and if somebody new comes along who I can Google and find out, sure enough, they are the mayor of Fort Bragg,
mhm.
then at the right transition point, then they get swapped in. I think, long term, I shouldn't have any role because it can't be dependent on me, obviously.
Mhm.
So I think in the future, that process of determining if this new person is more representative, we'd have to throw that to the group as well as a type of a vote or something. Something I didn't mention is that when we do that tally, some countries will be voted as not democracies. Let's take Russia, for instance. Pretty obvious there's not a lot of free press there, that type
Mhm.
of thing. So that means that they are going to still be allowed to be involved in each meeting to see what goes on. But if the previous year you were declared not a democracy, you didn't get that certification, that means you don't get to vote either in the next
Okay.
round.
Only
So you're kind
democracies
of
can
left
vote.
out in the cold there until your actions are good enough in your
Mhm,
governance that the larger group
mhm.
certified you as being a democracy.
Okay. So it sounds like your whole role in this is to get it started, and then
Yeah,
the
just
group
to
will
take
take over at some point and,
right. Yeah, I
run
know.
with
I'm
some.
just trying to push forward an idea that I think
Mhm,
has value. And the place I always come back to as a good example where this would have been useful in the past is if you remember during the Arab Spring, Egypt managed to throw out their dictator, which was
mhm,
a good thing. But the people ended up with another dictator running the country because
mhm,
they didn't have anywhere to go. There was nobody holding their hand saying, you know, for better quality of life and all the things that come with democracy, you need to have democratic governance. And
mhm,
that's kind of a nebulous thing for a group of protesters to push for. But if they have a very clear goal in saying we want to be a certified democracy, we want democratic certification, that is a goal then. And that forces whoever took over for being the leader of Egypt, if the people keep pushing him on it, that forces them down certain paths to get to the point where they really are a democracy. And rather than a failed revolution, which is essentially, unfortunately, what happened with Egypt.
so do
So
you see this group giving feedback as to, say, why a country is not a democracy, or ideas of what they need to do to become a democracy, or is it just yes, no?
yes or no.
Okay.
The idea has to be incredibly simple. You can't let it
Mhm,
get bogged down. It doesn't mean people can't talk. Maybe we allow them a certain time to talk, a minute, and saying, the reason I'm not voting Egypt to being a democracy is because I've looked at there's just no freedom of press there, whatever it is. You could do that. But I think there's also value in separating that piece out. Maybe the day before you have meetings
mhm.
about each country. But I think that there needs to have a real clear, prompt, short meeting that is
Mhm.
just the vote. So I kind of don't think I'd want to mix that in with all the debate, which is valid.
So I think the interesting thing here is, like you said, you've been thinking about this. I know we've been talking about it for years, and it seemed insurmountable. Like, how do you do this? And the other day, you texted me, I think I haven't figured it out. And I think the key is it's just so simple. You just need
Yeah,
one person from every country to start with.
yeah, it's kind of a crowdsourcing way. It's a way to begin the process.
Mhm,
You got to start somewhere, and
mhm,
if you can't start all the way at the full blown, every country participates, maybe that's not a problem. You just
mhm,
start slow. I know I'm on Facebook. I know a lot of people. I know people in the UK, all different places. I try to find somebody who will fill that role,
mhm.
somebody who believes that democratic peace theory is the right direction. And
So
by the
s
way, just to be clear, the United Nations does not fulfill this role. To the contrary, they put dictators in charge of the Security Council, which is completely wrong. The United Nations has a charter. It doesn't even include the word democracy. So
Mhm,
that was their design.
mhm.
Fine. It doesn't even have to be a replacement, but I'm taking a role that they fail to fulfill, and that is certifying democratic government.
What is the timetable, and what can people do if they're interested right now in representing a country?
A timetable is just as long as it takes me to do it. I have the websites, like, it sort of looks like it did 10 years ago, and I need to revise it. There's a lot
Mhm,
that has to change, so I need to do that. And then I just simply need to reach out to people and explain it, which I'm gonna create a page, a landing page that does explain
mhm.
what the volunteer role is, so I don't have to, verbally tell everybody. So it kind of falls entirely on my shoulders right now to update the website so that it reflects this new approach.
So anyone who is watching this video now in July of 2026, if they're interested, should they email you, or do you just want rather wait until you're a little
Uh,
further along?
I think we'll get to that point, but I'm not quite there yet.
Mhm, okay,
But it
good,
won't be long, I hope, before I will be looking for people. And I'm mostly gonna probably reach out to people I already know. I'm not trying to get just a completely random person.
right,
I'm trying to get somebody who I identified as being thoughtful
mhm,
and understanding the concepts and stuff. So, I
okay,
want to get it off to a good start. You know.
okay. Well, we'll update the description in this video and, hopefully soon be able to, put the website and the mandate and progress.
Yes,
Good.
exactly. So that's it.
Uh, okay, well, thanks, Gary, and we will be back soon with more videos on all sorts of different topics, so
Yep.
see y'all later. Bye.
Okay. Okay.